sounds like you can get blessed or not. If you leave a note of Jesus loves you, I would encourage you to do a tip. That might help. But I will be bringing you the first part of tonight's lesson, Answers for Atheists. So some of this has to do with evangelism, how you just answer the tough questions that people want to throw at you regarding your faith. So I will be answering the questions. Slide 2, please. How do we know that God exists and that the 66 books we call the Bible are wholly reliable and true? And does science disprove the Bible? So I don't know about you, but I've asked some of these questions in my own personal spiritual walk, and that's okay. God doesn't expect us to have no questions because God provides answers for us. God provides the answers because we are commanded in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be ready to give an answer for the hope that is within us. That hope in Hebrews, it tells us that our hope is in our anchor for our soul, firm and secure. But if that hope is assailed by doubts and questions that we don't have answers to, then our soul isn't very secure in that hope. In fact, it's in danger of drifting. So, Carl, Josiah, and I will be attempting to answer some of the common questions that skeptics and yourself may have, so that you can begin to make your faith your own. You have to be able to answer the questions about your faith and own your own faith before you can share it with someone else, and then you'll be better equipped to share with other people. So first, in sharing your faith, the reason for your hope, do so with gentleness and respect. 1 Peter 3:13-16 gives us a beautiful outline for witnessing. Who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good? Witnessing is part of doing good. But even if you should suffer for doing right, you are blessed. Do not fear what they fear, do not be afraid. But in your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. This is huge. He truly has to be the Lord of your life, and your faith has to be your own to be able to share with someone else. You can't ride the coattails of someone else's faith. You're not going to make it through the hard times on your parents' faith, or your pastor's faith, or your friend's faith. It has to be your faith. Next one, please. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. This is big. We have to live it out so that anyone watching our life can see evidence of the truth of the gospel. Preparing to witness to atheists or anyone else requires a certain amount of work. We have to apply ourselves to understanding the questions and the answers to these questions. So, first question. How do we know that the 66 books we call the Bible are actually God's words, wholly reliable and true? If this question is answered and the Bible is verified as true, then it makes all other questions a whole lot easier to answer, because then we can go to the Bible as a reliable resource. So this is mainly a historical question, the who, when, and how the Bible being put together. Historically, we know Jesus lived. That's a fact. Jesus' life and teachings were recorded historically, just as any other history is recorded, at the time or right after the fact by personal eyewitnesses. Even our calendar system is based upon Jesus' life, BC and AD. BC means before Christ, and AD stands for a Latin phrase that means in the year of our Lord. So we're 100% sure that Jesus existed to base our calendars on. To decide if a book that records these kind of stories is truly from God, you would expect it to meet certain criteria. Two of the criteria you would expect it to meet is historically accurate and scientifically accurate. First, historically accurate. The Bible accurately records details about people groups, cities, and customs. Archaeological finds continue to confirm these details. This is a little cross-section of the walls of Jericho. This is one of the stories that the Bible records. So it's not like in VeggieTales where it's this little square city. It was like intense. It wouldn't have been easy for the Israelites to destroy the city. The Bible records that the walls fell down, that the Israelites burned the city, and that Rahab's house, which was part of the outer wall, was still standing. When archaeologists dug up the city of Jericho, they found that the walls had fallen out, which doesn't make sense if an attack was, in, because that was God's hand. That there was like a foot layer of ash in a layer of the archaeological finds, meaning that it had been burnt out. And that a little section of the north wall That's probably where Rahab's house was. So the Bible accurately records history. So, sorry, that was last page. Okay, on to scientific accuracy. Even though the Bible isn't a science textbook, every time it speaks of scientific matters, it speaks accurately. Many modern scientific concepts only recently discovered were recorded in the Bible thousands of years before it would ever have been possible for these people to know this, except that God inspired the book. So, this is a picture from my 7th grade science book. Shameless plug about being homeschooled, you learn these things in middle school. Ancient people believed that the world, like ancient Greeks believed that God had the world on his shoulders, and ancient Hindus believed that elephants lived the world on their backs. This is before man could go to space. But Job records in 25:7, he spreads out the northern skies over empty space, and he suspends the earth over nothing. Job lived 1,500 plus years before Christ. There's no way he would have had access to any scientific information to prove what he said, except that God revealed it to him. The second scientific example is this. This guy is Matthew A4A. He was a 19th century navigator who believed every word that the Bible said was inspired and true. So this includes Psalm 8:8, where it refers to the pathways of the seas. He spent over 40 years trying to find these pathways, and at the end of the 40 years, he had discovered and charted the major currents of the ocean. So while the Bible spoke of this, it hadn't been discovered until the 19th century. So this is where the Bible is. The 66 books that we call the Bible is both historically and scientifically accurate every time it speaks, just as you would expect a divinely inspired book to be. Jesus' teachings in the New Testament were written down by eyewitnesses, and Jesus helped to verify Old Testament scriptures when he quoted and taught from them. When church leaders were deciding which books and letters would make it into the New Testament, they put it through a checklist or test. There was other books that might have been around, like the letter of Barnabas or the Gospel of Thomas. But the books that made it into what we have, the 27 New Testament canon, were put through a test something like, was it written by someone who had first-hand knowledge or experience? Does it align with Jesus' teachings? And is it accepted by the church? You see, some of the other writings that popped up that claimed to be divinely inspired didn't match up with what Jesus had taught. They had, a few weird things in them. And there was people still alive who personally knew Jesus who could yay or nay these things. So just to summarize that, I have a little video clip from, has anybody ever seen What's in the Bible of Denver? Enjoy it? Pete, good. Jackson. It helps to summarize the church history of how we got the 66 books.
Around 30 AD. By 95 AD, just 65 years later, all the writings of the New Testament had been completed and were being passed from church to church as Christianity spread.
How? By parents?
No, mostly people walking from town to town. But new writings kept popping up, and some of them were a little wacky.
What do you mean?
Well, they didn't agree with the old writings. Sometimes people wrote something and said it was from a famous apostle like John or Paul, when it really wasn't.
Right? They lied?
Yeah, it was getting very confusing. So the leaders of the church decided they needed an official list or a canon of the New If a writing passed all three tests, it was in the canon.
Right? I dropped a bag of cookies in a cannon once.
I'll drop you in a cannon. By 200 AD, everyone agreed on 21 of the 27 books. By 240, they agreed on all but 4.
Sorry. Captain P goes on for a while, but that was an important part. So that just kind of summarizes how we got the 27 books of the New Testament, and then a similar process was used by the Jewish leaders to get the 39 books of the Old Testament. So we know that our Bible is verifiable, true, and a very detailed and divinely inspired process went into getting the books that we have. So second question, how do you even know there is a God? Well, I'd like to point out that since we just verified the Bible as historically and scientifically accurate, it tells us there's God, so we can believe it. But more than that, God leaves his fingerprints. He wants his children to see the evidence of him around. So Romans 1:20 says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse." Now, it's a little complicated at first, but for since the creation of the world, since the very beginning, God's invisible qualities, eternal and divine, that's just who God is, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. That's very key. Creation is the greatest proof of a creator. I have a little demonstration to prove it. So if Jackson and Madison and Kendra could come up here, please. I have brownies for them. Great. All right, now, when you receive brownies, or you see brownies, usually the first, what you ask is who made this? Already assuming that there's a person making it, correct? You wouldn't think that these ingredients were sitting on my counter yesterday and just decided to explode and make brownies. No, it had 5 little siblings help doing that, exploding that. But it was creation is the greatest proof of a creator. Never assume that something, even as simple as a brownie, comes without intelligent design, comes without somebody creating it. A single cell is much more complicated than any brownie could ever be. And so what God is saying, or what Paul is saying in Romans 1:20, when it talks about how God has been seen by what has been made so that men are without excuse, what it's saying is when people look at this world, they're without excuse to know that there was a God who created it. Because it's in our nature to know that there's a creator. All right, you guys can take the brownies to your seats. Thank you. Everybody give them a hand for eating so well. That God has witnessed to creation and recorded it to tell us. So, third question, does science disprove the Bible? The quick and easy answer to this is no, it doesn't. No matter what you may have heard. But we've already briefly touched on this when we discussed how modern scientific discoveries have verified what the Bible has already said is true. But still, people use supposed scientific facts like in the classroom, workplace, and media that supposedly disprove the Bible. They throw in facts like distant starlight, radiometric dating, and the geological column of carbon-14 dating. Upon closer examination, however, we will see that these don't disprove the Bible. In fact, they agree with it and verify it. So we only have time for one specific example, radiometric dating. So radiometric dating attempts to date rocks. So there are volcanoes that have exploded in history, and we know the dates. We know when the lava formed these rocks. We know how old these rocks are. We know they're 85, 29, 38. There was a whole bunch of examples. I asked my brother for some, and he gave me 25. But when they come back from radiometric dating, they date 11, 35, and 2.4 million years. If radiometric dating, scientific dating, can't date rocks of known age, then it definitely can't date rocks of unknown age. Therefore, radioisotope dating doesn't disprove the Bible. In fact, findings in the geological column and ways of dating actually point to a much younger universe, which fits historically with the Bible. So I don't have time to talk about lots more science, but always know this: science never has and it never will disprove the Bible. So I hope this has equipped you to answer some of the to establish God exists, the Bible is 100% true and accurate, and science doesn't disprove it, please welcome Carl to provide you some more answers.